Hey everybody, continuing these videos on mental illness and Jesus Christ and how he really does save people from terrifying mental illness. And sorry, it's been a little bit since since I last posted a video. I have two kids. One of them is 4 months old, so there's a lot going on in my life to navigate being a dad and learning those things. And but still, through my Facebook page, Jesus Heals Mental Illness, I'm interacting with people all over the place who are really, truly suffering, and some are taking steps towards Christ, but others are really, anguishing and questioning and suffering extensively, and it's getting worse. And so I wanted to make this video tonight to share a little about my experience, particularly when it was really, really bad for me, and the things that I experienced, and then what brought me then to my encounter with God. What I don't want to happen here is for us to, or for you rather, to look internally, or look at your wounds, because often what happens is we look at symptoms, we focus on symptoms, we get terrorized by symptoms, we're looking, and we're Googling things, and it just kind of downward spirals and it unravels. I don't want you to look at your wound. I want you to recognize your wound, that you need saved, that you need healed, but don't focus on the wound, but rather seek and focus on the Savior and the healer. And it's when our focus and our seeking is focused on Jesus, that's when the healing happens. So often we become so like looking here and looking at our wounds and our terror, and rightly so in a sense, because I know it is absolutely miserable, but we cannot stay there. We have to recognize it, and then we have to do absolutely everything we can to get to Jesus. But in saying that, I do want to share, to give some of you not comfort, but encouragement and courage to continue to endure, to share a few of the things that I was experiencing in the dark and in the depths of my suffering. And a lot of these things, I see myself as almost like a poster child in these things, because I had 28 years of Christianity in the sense of like church going, very involved in my church that I was at, very kind of Bible focused, verse by verse. I knew a lot of Bible. I'd memorized a lot of Bible. I had written Christian worship songs, led those to my church, talked to people about God all the time. I did missionary work, all these things. And that was my life. And then my unraveling happened. And so there was a lot of, in looking back, there was a lot of me, like Will, that needed broken, because there was a lot of like religious pride. There was a lot of, well, yeah, I believe these things. There was a lot of, oh, I know this about God, or I'm mature in my faith. Like there was a lot of that, because I was very outgoing. I was very outward and vocal about Christianity. But as I've shared in other videos, when pressure was applied, it revealed that Will had nothing of genuine faith inside of him. It was just a lot of external, whitewashed tomb type, when Jesus called out the Pharisees. There was a lot of that for me. There's externals, but there was not genuine internal. The natural man can very easily imitate the spiritual man, like how we're born naturally, like an outgoing person or a smart intellectual person can very easily imitate Jesus, like the spiritual person. They can masquerade and, kind of just imitate. Oh, you do this. Oh, you do that. When there is not pressure applied. Okay. And in America, when there's not many external pressures, there's not persecution, somebody like me could live their 28 years of what I lived and imitate the Christian life, but not have the real genuine article. And so when pressure then is applied, then it shows, oh, there's nothing genuine in Will. So in saying that, there were, that's what I had for 28 years. And that's why I'm the poster child of a lot of you, for a lot of the suffering that happens in mental illness, because it's like, well, Will was very religious. Like, how did this happen? And I had those questions. So I'm going to kind of break down a little bit of what I went through and the terror that happened with me, to be an encouragement to you. And what happened with me, like I shared in the other videos, it started with sin, worry, and anxiety. And the spiritual sin of worry and anxiety then brought about a ripple effect into my emotions, and then also into me mentally, and then also and physically, and those things are all connected. But the sin and the continuation in sin, because the pressure was applied to my life, that it brought about this downward spiral. And so it started with sin, and it was very, in a sense, it was very small, like a concern about my back, and then, and it was rational in a sense, and that's what it started off as, rational fears. But then when the worry of my back happened over weeks, then it started to enter into irrational fears when I began to worry about blood pressure, and the fear and concerns with my blood pressure. And my family has past heart issues. My grandmother passed away of an aneurysm in her heart. So there was that kind of layer of fear, like, oh, my blood pressure. I went to the doctor, and she said, oh, your blood pressure was high. When I went and checked on my back was finally better, but anxiety had built up, and then it just switched over to the blood pressure. And that's when it became kind of irrational fears, that I was concerned that my heart would, I would have a heart attack, or it's still rational in a sense, but it was starting to go the way of like, Will, this is not rational. Like you're getting weird in your fears here. So that entered me into kind of like where it began to started to have intrusive thoughts meaning just thoughts I did not want to have. And that carried into insomnia. I was afraid that I would, never sleep again, which in a sense is irrational. It's like, what do you mean you'll never sleep again? When you get tired, you sleep. Well, if you've ever dealt with insomnia, it is terror. That's when insomnia started happening with me. That's when it became a living nightmare, 24/7. When I couldn't sleep. And so that was, that's when irrational kind of intrusive fears started to happen. And then it became to the point where, and this is all just anxiety. It's all fear of something's going to happen, fear of something's not going to happen, fear that my life will not be normal because I'll never sleep again, or a fear, and then you start developing these things. I remember there was like a tingling in my foot, and then I was like, oh, what's this tingle in my foot? So what do? I Google, tingling in foot, and, oh my gosh, the terrible world web, saying I got cancer, or, or multiple sclerosis, or all these things. So these dominoes start falling because, again, I was not truly trusting in God. I was not truly a child of His. So the pressure is like, it's unraveling before me. So that's what everything looked like. It was all just built on fear. And then eventually it became, fear for my life, that I was concerned that that I'd die. And that was just, another fear. And all of these fears were all happening at once. And this was before I even went to the psych ward and took psych meds. All of that happened. And then when I was in the ward, there were, a living nightmare in there. Absolutely torturous, because I had all this mind knowledge, but I'd realized none of it worked. What happened to me? I remember just pacing up and down the psych ward, up and down and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And I remember people looking at me like, like people in rehab just looking at me like, oh my gosh, what happened to this guy? I thought it was over. I thought I was going to be institutionalized and never get out of there. And at that point, then on all these psych meds that they had given me, and I was just a mess. It made it even worse because now there's all these chemicals. And so now it's affecting me physically even more. So there was the hell of the psych ward and the psych meds. And I can share with any of you personally about that if you have more questions of those things. And then in coming, after they numbed me down and coming out of the ward, then I went into basically where it was another torture because of all the chemical terror and nothing was stable. And when I got out of the ward, it was just a living hell. Like, I don't remember having technically any like persistent, consistent thoughts. It was just a living terror that I couldn't get out of, but I wanted out of it. And I was living with my parents and like volunteering at the local library and just tortured in my mind at the time. And I remember like staring at my early one morning, like just staring at my sister, like, and she looked at me and she was like, "What in the world?" And I was like, "I don't know, but I feel like I'm dying." And that was reality. And so eventually, then there was this somehow of all the psych meds I took, then though I do have strong convictions about psych meds and how they're not God's answer, but there was this one psych med that I took that like made me feel better. And so it stabilized me in a sense. But I just want a small caveat if you don't listen to other videos. If somebody is anxious and they go and take the chemical of alcohol and they drink alcohol, they feel better for a moment. They're normal, they're enjoying themselves. But what happens the next morning? That chemical of alcohol, like beer or any other type of alcohol, wears off. It's the same thing with marijuana. You're anxious and then you take the chemical of marijuana or any other type of recreational drug or even stronger drugs, and they affect you positively, like you feel okay. But the reality is those chemicals wear off, and it's the same thing with psych meds. I found the medicine or the alcohol, the beer that worked for me, and which was the psych med, but I was going to have to take that for the rest of my life and be dependent upon it. And so when it did like stabilize, like it numbed me, it stabilized everything. I still knew, well, I need to go back to where I was living and become more diligent in my faith. So I started weaning off the meds. And sure enough, when I started weaning off meds, like if somebody stops drinking alcohol or if somebody stops going to a recreational drug to deal with their anxiety, they're going to realize, oh man, this anxiety is really bad. So I got to go back to the alcohol or whatever it might be. But as I weaned off the psych meds, and I was on like 7 or 8 of them, but as I weaned off, the terror started coming back. And it's not that I wasn't experiencing terror. It was just like more of when I was on the meds, it was like, what the heck happened to me? And how do I get back to normal? Like what in my mind, what I thought normal was. And so in weaning off the psych meds, I don't need the psych meds, I'm weaning off. And then when I got back down to about 2 meds, the terrors started coming back. Terrors meaning fear, irrational fears, fear of, just anxiety. All the past fears, they started creeping back in. And that's when I realized, what in the world? I thought I dealt with all these things. No, I had not truly dealt with them. I had numbed them and I had taken chemicals into me that relieved me of the terror. But I, in my heart, did not truly take care of them. And so down to these meds. And then that's when, as I shared in my story, it got even worse. So up to this point, anxieties. I also experienced right out of the ward, terrifying depression and despair, because I looked back and said, what the heck happened to me? Terrifying despair, like darkness, suicidal thoughts. But the suicidal thoughts I had with anxiety was like afraid that my life would end. But now the despair after the word was like just the darkness of despair. So I was experiencing those things. Anxiety, also experienced some OCD stuff, washing my hands all the time and things like that. And then also right around that point where I was almost off all the meds is when I entered into a new realm of like dark, blasphemous thoughts against God, odd thoughts about myself, like my identity, like what I am, very weird thoughts about other people, about objects. I would look at an object and it would, kind of just distorted things, like the object, there would be the whisper in my mind of worship that object because that object is God. So worship that cup, or real weird things. I know it's weird, but anybody who's experiences these things, it's real. It's real. So I'm just sharing what's happened in me. All that started happening all at once, these really dark, blasphemous, odd thoughts. And then right at that, so that's when I realized, oh, this is a new level of terror that I'd never even experienced in months and months of mental torture. Then this stuff is coming in. I can't even believe I'm having the thoughts. That's when I knew, like, this is just weird. And then also in that season, I began to have terrifying doubts about Christianity, because in the terror and all the darkness and the anxieties and the weird thoughts, I would seek God and the Bible, but then I would get hit with questions that I could not answer in my natural mind, just rationally. I couldn't wrap my mind around how the existence of hell, for example, or the existence or the reality that God has always existed, or that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, or that he was perfect. My mind couldn't wrap itself around these things because I was trying to generate faith just naturally, like learning about God, like math or history. Like I was trying to generate truth in my own mind, which I'll share in other videos. It's not possible. We cannot generate anything in and of ourselves. It has to be grace. It has to be something that is given to us. But I had not yet received the grace of God. I had years of outward religion, but it had come to this climax to where terror, but I was seeking, but then I couldn't wrap my mind around these things. So it caused me to doubt. The doubt would then throw me back into the terrors. So all of this was happening all at once. I was barely holding a part-time job down. I was like clenching my teeth, just clenching my teeth throughout the whole day, pacing around the town that I lived in. I worked part-time at a nonprofit, a local nonprofit. I would work like 3 or 4 hours, then just come home and wail, sheet over my head on my bed, wailing, pacing around town, showers all the time, like just terror. So that's what my life looked like. And I know a lot of you out there are really suffering right now, and that you feel like it's as worse as it can possibly be, and that your terror, nobody knows, and there's not possibility that you would be saved. Let me just tell you that I experience exactly what you're experiencing of seeing the impossibility of it all, because there were so many layers, there were so many terrors all happening all at once. I just I didn't see how it was possible that I was going to get out of it. And I heard testimonies, and I looked up, people who had, miracles happen. But for me, I just looked at myself and all the terrors I was dealing with, and I was like, I don't see how it's possible that I'm going to make it out of this. And at the time, I had the thought of maybe I should journal through this, but I was like, I'm not going to live through this. Why would I journal through this if I'm not going to live through it? So this video, I'm going to do other videos here shortly, but this video is just to share with you that I know what the terror is. I know the 24/7 panic. I know the irrational anxieties. I know the focusing on symptoms, and I know deep, dark despair. I know suicidal thoughts. I know these things, and I'm not saying these things like, oh, look at me, I know what terrifying is, or I know what just darkness is. I'm not saying this anything for me. I'm saying this to bring God glory, to bring Jesus Christ fame, because he himself really does save those who are in the deep dark. He is an infinite God. He's infinite. So that means that he is infinite in all of his characteristics. And guess what one of his characteristics is? Guess what one of his names is? Savior. That means that he has an infinite capability to save. So in that he is the creator, anything that happens to his creation, however far the depth of the terror is, in that he's infinite in his saving, he can reach out and save, no matter how low you are, no matter how deep and dark you are in the terror, Jesus Christ is the infinite Savior. He can save you from no matter how low you are. The key is, though, will you seek Him and Him alone? Will you desperately seek an encounter with Jesus Christ? Not seek anything or anyone else out. And I am radical about that. Nothing in all of creation, no one in all of creation, seeking an encounter with Jesus Christ. So in my next videos, I'm going to share what that looked like for me. What did it mean that I was desperately seeking Jesus Christ? So yeah, look forward to these other videos. Thanks, guys.